Welcome to the Fantasy Football Factory podcast presented by Miller Lite. I'm your host, Ben Mintz, getting ready to talk about what was just one of the crazier NFL Sundays I can remember in quite some time. All hell broke loose in the NFL. The only man I want to talk about it with is my co-host, Steven Cheah. Mr. Cheah, how are you today?
What's up, buddy? Probably almost as good as you. You looked like you were having some fun yesterday on a beanbag chair watching the Sunday night games.
That's about the only fun I had. I got destroyed. I had one of my worst NFL Sundays I've had in years. The old thrown to the mat in Las Vegas, but always darkest before dawn. I'll be back tomorrow. NFL was crazy though. Still enjoyed watching games. Still had a good fantasy Sunday. We're going to focus on the positives like we always try to do.
There you go. This podcast is brought to you by Miller Lite, our friends at Miller Lite. Great tasting, less filling, 96 calories, 3.2 grams of carbs per 12 ounces. The absolute best. Celebrate responsibly. Brewed in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Miller Brewing Company. I saw a ton of Miller times yesterday in the Chiefs or in the Browns Chargers game. We are just talking about it off air. Awesome game. Let's get into that in a moment. But get Miller Lite anywhere beer is sold. Grocery store, beer store, liquor dispensary. Every place has Miller Lite. A bar is going to have Miller Lite. I know in Philly you can buy a 6-pack and just carry it out, which is pretty interesting. But if you just want to stay at home, sit on your couch, watch some football tonight, any night, go to MillerLite.com/fantasy. Get it delivered right to you. We appreciate Miller Lite and their sponsorship. But yeah, we're just talking about it off air. Browns Chargers, a fantasy fourth quarter for the ages. I mean, the whole game was incredible, but just back and forth. Austin Eckler owners very happy. Mike Williams is the new wide receiver 1 in fantasy, passing Cooper Kupp.
The fourth quarter of this game, there were 41 points. The Chargers scored 26-15 Chargers in the fourth. And so much to unpack on this one. But Justin Herbert, holy freaking crap. He had 398, 4 touchdowns. And this is on the heels. And yesterday on Dear Mr. Fantasy, and thanks to everyone for joining us. And that was great. And all the listener questions. But Cleveland shut Minnesota down completely last week in Minnesota. And Herbert comes out and there's 398, 4 touchdowns and ran the ball. And that fourth quarter, Austin Eckler, as you said, really good game running, receiving. The play where the Browns picked him up and threw him in the end zone. Yeah. I mean, that game was just off the rails, just insane.
Yeah, that was an awesome game. Herbert, Michael, the pass interference call at the end was crazy. I hated as a fan watching the Browns. I get they're pinned deep as 3rd and 10, but they're winning by 1 point because of, we'll get into this right after, kicking yesterday. Horrendous. The worst kicking day I've ever seen as an NFL fan, costing a lot of fantasy owners, bettors, a lot of joy. The end of we'll talk about it in a sec, but the end of the Bengals-Packers game was laugh out loud funny. But just fantasy points everywhere. The fact that the Browns are winning by 1 point with a couple minutes left. I think there was maybe 4 or 5 minutes left. They have their ball 3rd and 10. I get it. You're probably not going to convert it based on the odds, but you're going to call a draw as a complete give up play. You can't call the draw on 3rd and long. They punt the ball back. Chargers immediately get the ball, take the lead. Do not give it back. Game over.
I couldn't believe they were in the draw. Baker played well. Baker had over 300 yards passing and 2 touchdowns. And David Njoku, freaking, where the hell did that come from? He had just monster game, including an over 70-yard touchdown. Everybody went off in this game except for one man, Steven Cheah, your boy, Odell Beckham.
Yeah, I told you, safest preseason bet possible. Under 850 total yards for Odell Beckham Jr. But yeah, we saw actually almost identical fantasy performances from Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb. Very interesting when you look at overall the running back rankings right now. We got Kareem Hunt right now at RB5, Nick Chubb at RB8.
That's crazy, too, because Chubb still gets a lot more carries. Hunt's scoring touchdowns and catching the balls. It's just amazing what that offense is able to do to support, 2 fantasy running backs in the top 8 of the whole league. It's a 32-team league, Steven Cheah.
Yeah, absolutely wild. So what I want to talk about from yesterday is, we have a lot of predictability. So in fantasy, things are going to kind of regress to the mean. Yesterday, we saw basically unanimous top 10 quarterbacks. Justin Herbert, Tom Brady, Josh Allen finishes top 3 performers. Not super surprising. QB4 and QB5 yesterday, Jameis Winston and Davis Mills. Where did this come from?
This Jameis thing is so
I
weird.
Told you.
Steven,
I told you.
Steven, who would you believe
Yes.
that Jameis Winston, after 5 weeks, is on pace for 44 touchdowns this season? 44. I mean, this is the craziest thing. It's a Hail Mary. Look, I'm a big Saints fan, and I wrote a blog about this yesterday that you can find on Barstool. Yesterday, in the first half, the full Jameis experience.
Yep.
Threw an awful pick early, then throws a 72-yard touchdown on a strike to Deontay Harris, then an awful fumble, and then he hits a Hail Mary before the half. I was just sitting there at halftime. I did a video. I was just shaking my head like, I mean, it's wildly entertaining. You just never really know what you're going to get. But I think the story kind of almost, and this isn't as much fancy, what the hell happened to the Washington football team defense? Jack Del Rio should be fired. I mean, you look at the last few weeks, Atlanta scored over 30. The Saints scored 33. The Giants scored 29. I mean, this is one of the best defenses in football. You got 5 first-round picks on your front 7. They can't stop anybody. I mean, that's crazy to me. But Jameis, 4 touchdowns. Alvin Kamara, 120-something total yards, 2 touchdowns. He looked good. You know, that's one of the better Saints offensive efforts all year for sure.
I got some bad news for the Washington football team and their fans. They're playing the Chiefs next week, so it's not going to get too much better for them. But yeah, that game was just such a. Jameis was 15 of 30 passing, so the most attempts he's had in the game, but 50% completion. He had a fumble loss, an interception, and then 4 touchdowns, one of them being the Hail Mary at the end of the half. Marquez Callaway finally cashing in for you. Hopefully you started him. We'll talk about later if he's worth a pick or not.
A little fluky considering the Hail Mary. You know? I mean, the Hail Mary was a huge part of it. And then, trying to be optimistic for the Saints. I mean, they got a bye week next week. Hopefully Michael Thomas comes back, all that stuff. But this is a fantasy pod. Jameis Winston, though, on pace for 44 touchdowns, the most head-scratching season so far you can imagine. It's just been everything you could hope for and more.
So one thing I want to check in with you on, so we're 5 weeks through the fantasy season. Right now, let me just go through the top 5 quarterbacks. We got Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert. No big surprise. QB5. A guy you had ranked as QB 25, Jalen Hurts. How do we feel now?
Well, he has a lot of hidden fantasy value, as we've said, because the rushing.
He's got more points than Kyler.
Yeah, but no, got to give him credit, and got to give the Eagles credit too, because they look like crap for 3 quarters in that game and gutted it out thanks to Sam Darnold, 3 picks and just totally making terrible decisions. But got to give Jalen Hurts credit. I'm eating some serious crow on that, as I've admitted several times on this pod. One of those guys where like you watch him play. Certainly doesn't look like the 5th best quarterback in fantasy when you watch him, but there's so much hidden value at the rushing. Yeah. That's part of fantasy. And especially in leagues, look, talk about this all the time. If you're in a league where 4-point passing touchdowns, the rushing value is so paramount. Like if it's 5 or 6 for passing touchdowns, you kind of sliding scale, digress it a little. But if you're playing 4-point passing touchdowns, you got to get the quarterbacks that can run, and he can do it. When
we talk about 4-point passing touchdown leagues with the quarterbacks that can run, we look at, number 1 is Tom Brady. Okay, he has had a couple of games with 4 or 5 touchdowns. Not crazy surprising there. But you got Patrick Mahomes, who did a really nice job running the football last night. Josh Allen, who obviously can run, scored some rushing touchdowns last night. Justin Herbert, who's got some wheels. Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, like all these guys can run. Then we get down to the more, and there's like a pretty sizable drop after Kyler Murray to guys that aren't necessarily running guys, where you got Matt Stafford. Dak does run a little bit. Sam Darnold, who has had an interesting rushing touchdown revival.
That's fluky though.
But then, Daniel Jones, Lamar Jackson, like right there. It's kind of interesting to see how, that safe floor is really a safe haven for a lot of fantasy managers.
Yeah, no, it is. And the hidden rushing value, it's just so key, as you said. And it's wild. I wouldn't have said Hurts number 5. There's no denying it. I thought like if everything broke right, he could be like top 10, top 15, but never would have thought 5.
Yeah. I got a question for you. Or actually, let's talk really quickly about the Packers-Bengals game.
Oh, yeah. I watched this game because I was watching where I was. I was at the M Resort, Penn property in Vegas, and I had the Saints Washington football team game on and the Packers-Bengals game on. And the ending of that Packers-Bengals game,
Crazy.
3 missed field goals in the last 2 minutes.
Mason Crosby missed an easy one.
Oh, and then in overtime, you saw it again.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Bayou Bengals yet again. Jamar Chase, 6 for 159 and a touchdown, caught a 70-yarder. Just looks dominant. I don't hear anybody talking about him not being able to see the football anymore. Remember that story preseason?
Yeah.
That one seems long gone. And then, I mean, I know you talk about like Devontae, when Devontae Adams was wide receiver 1 going into the draft and a lot of stuff. So when he does great, people don't maybe appreciate it. But everybody in the world knows where the ball's going all the time. And he still has 11 for 206. I mean, you just got to appreciate him and Rodgers' greatness. I mean, exactly where it's going and you can't stop it. Just an incredible effort by him too. And then just the ending to that game with all the kickers missing, like you said, just crazy. Mason Crosby finally got that one in OT.
So McPherson kicked the one right at the end of the game, or was it? I think it was the end of the regulation, and he thinks he makes it. Like he turns around and starts celebrating with his team before it goes in.
It hit the little flag, the win flag.
The flag. So, I mean, it was close, but I guess he thought he nailed it. It was a very far field goal. It was like 56, 57. He's definitely got the leg for it, but that is a crazy move, right? Like you see that in like basketball where you see like Steph Curry will shoot a 3 and he'll turn around. You know, if you're a shooter, you shoot enough, you can kind of feel it. I assume the same thing is with kickers, but then he has the very, the Nick Young gif where he shoots it, turns around and does this and then it, rims out. That is a tough look.
Yeah, it also like fitting for the Bengals too, like when you just look at the history. I know they're 3-2 though, so they're certainly doing a lot better. But you're right, that's what he's going to see. He's going to see that meme forever, the rest of his life.
I had an all-time bad beat on this game. Maybe not all time, but it was a tough beat. I did a 5-leg parlay. I did Joe Burrow and Aaron Rodgers over 1.5 touchdowns. I did Jamar Chase and Devontae Adams both to score, and the over 50.5. So all of it hit in the first half besides the over, obviously. 30 points at the half. They come back, tie it. 44 total points. It was 22 all. I'm thinking, okay, Mason Crosby hits it. Bengals will go down, go to overtime, kick a field goal. I'm going to hit the over. Miss a field goal. Then McPherson misses it. And then first play of overtime, I'm like, all right, I got a shot. If they kick a field goal, then, one more. First play of overtime is a pick. So tough loss for me on that one. But overall, very fun game.
I had the Bengals +3 in the over. I was salty too. And I was salty at Carolina blowing that lead as well. Let's talk a little bit about our friends at Chevy Silverado, who are much more, you want something that's a lot more dependable than the NFL kickers on Sunday, especially the ones in the Green Bay, Cincinnati game. Let's talk about the strongest, most advanced Chevrolet Silverado ever. Football season is in full swing, and it's time to up your tailgating game. And you better enjoy this fall weather we've got in October. No better time to tailgate than this month. The available multi-flex tailgate with 6 convenient configurations will give you a step up on your tailgate game. There's a primary tailgate, which opens with the push of a button on the key fob or from inside the truck. The inner gate folds to a large step for easily getting in and out of the bed. There's an easy access configuration where the inner gate folds down, allowing you to reach farther into the bed. It can also become a desk or a surface for your tailgating meal. Chevrolet Silverado is modern and advanced with a ton of grit, a partner in getting things done. Silverado is strong and dependable as the people who drive them.
Love it. I want to talk about
Hopefully a lot more dependable than those kickers.
Yeah. Let's talk about someone who was looking very dependable and then all of a sudden not. That's Derek Carr. What's going on with him? His first couple games, 435 yards, 382 yards, 386 yards, 2 touchdowns in each game. The Raiders are 3-0. Then all of a sudden, the wheels fall completely off. 196 yards, 2 touchdowns at the pick. They lose. They lose to the Chargers. And then yesterday against Chicago, 206 yards, no touchdowns and a pick. Just not in sync. Like, looked very bad. Is he a guy that if he's, I don't think he's a QB1 right now. He's overall, he's certainly playable as a low end QB1. But, if you're in a super flex league, are you confident with him as your QB2?
The thing with Carr, this actually has been this Gruden Carr last few years. You've had the Raiders will have these runs because we've seen them melt down the stretch the last 2 seasons. It's like this year they start out 3-0, and you kind of always talk yourself into them, are the Raiders back and all that stuff. And then right when you believe in them, it seems like they fall off.
Yeah.
And, got to give some credit to the Bears defense. The Bears defense is playing well. They've had, I believe, 4 of the 5 games allowed less than 20 points now. So you got to give them some credit. But you just can't trust them. Every time you talk yourself into it, they fall off. But that was a very rough effort yesterday. 9 points of pro football, not going to get it done.
Yeah, as a guy who was hyping Darren Waller up before the season, it's been a pretty disappointing couple weeks. I do want to provide some good news in that next week the next 3 weeks could be a little bit tough. So I think this is an interesting buy low area. They're going to be against the at Denver, which is always a tough matchup. And they're a very good defense. Then they're playing Philly. Then they have a bye. Then things kind of open up more at the Giants, KC, Cincinnati, at Dallas, Washington, at KC. Things kind of open up for them down the stretch. It could be a rough next 3 weeks, but it could be an interesting opportunity to buy low on some of these guys. If Derek Carr, super flex league for a QB2 value, Darren Waller certainly is at a low point right now, and he's still producing. Right now, he's tight end 6, and he's pretty close really to tight end 2. Could be an opportunity to buy low there. A couple guys I wanted to ask you about, though, Mincy, for buy low or sell high. Let's 2 guys specific, 2 elite receivers. I'm going to ask you the first one, who's an Ole Miss guy, DK Metcalf. What are we doing there? Russell Wilson out a couple weeks. Geno Smith going to be the starter. How do you feel about DK Metcalf as a fantasy manager?
So first of all, Wilson, at first they said it could be 6 to 8 weeks. Now they're saying 4. So huge difference there. I know Pete Carroll, Russell Wilson, known for his incredible healing power. That's what Pete Carroll quote said. I just think it's a situation where unless you get a good offer, you have to hold, because nobody's going to want to trade for him with Geno Smith start playing quarterback the next 4 weeks. I mean,
Geno Smith looked pretty good.
No, agreed. That's my point. I think that the fact that he looked competent, I know he threw that interception at the end, but he looked great before that. I think you got to hold on to DK because you can't. I don't want to sell low on him because of this Geno thing and get fleeced. I mean, if you're a good owner, Wilson will be back in 4 or 5 weeks, and you'll still be in okay shape for your playoff push. The guy that I think it's going to hurt even more than DK may be Tyler Lockett.
Yeah,
because Wilson and him have just such they've got one of those chemistries that you just can't even process. They just know exactly where they're going to be with the route running and reading defenses and making route adjustments. And there's just all this stuff to it that's so high level with the way Lockett plays. And so I'm actually more worried about him than DK. But I think you got to hold on DK unless you get a great offer. But I don't see who would send it right now.
Right. Okay. What about Calvin Ridley? This is an interesting one. I'll take this one. I think he's a very interesting buy low candidate. So he missed the game against the Jets for personal reasons. They're also going into a bye, so he's going to have 2 off weeks in a row. He's not performing at the level we would have hoped for this season. There was potential. I think his over-under in the Barstool Sportsbook was 1,400 receiving yards. So he was projected to be right at the top of the league lead for receiving yards going into the year. He's averaging 10.5 targets a game, averaging just under 7 catches a game. He's only scored once. Getting in the end zone hasn't been a problem like it was for Julio Jones in the past with Atlanta and Matt Ryan. I think he's a very, very interesting buy low candidate. I think if you're a fantasy manager of Calvin Ridley, you got to be frustrated with the production because you draft him for wide receiver 1 value, and he hasn't exactly produced that because you're expecting to see touchdowns. You're expecting to see, enormous performances with, 100 yards, pretty much a lock. He hasn't given you that. But I would encourage you, if you're an opportunistic owner, Calvin Ridley is a very, very interesting buy low candidate. He's going into the bye. Owners are going to have to put him on the bench. He was already on the bench against the Jets because of personal reasons, and he was out. So I think you're at a window right now where you can really strike while the iron is, or I don't even want to say strike while the iron is hot because it's not. But you can really take advantage of a good value right here with Calvin Ridley.
I want to add one thing to that. We finally saw the Kyle Pitts breakout yesterday with 9 for 119, the touchdown, and him stepping up as a threat will help Ridley immensely to get some people off him too. And I always like Ridley in those dome games. I agree with you on him on buy low. No, I'm definitely not done with him. And you're not dealing like you are in Seattle. You're not dealing with the quarterback injury here either.
Yeah. Pitts, I would caution on, he had a great game yesterday, and I think he's going to be an awesome, awesome player. But as far as fantasy numbers for this year, Calvin Ridley and Russell Gage were both out. So let's kind of temper expectations. I'm not expecting 120 yards every week from him, but awesome game from Kyle Pitts.
I want to talk about. I got two running backs or a couple running backs I want to give shout outs to on the dependability. Derrick Henry's over under was 114.5 yesterday, and I still love the over on Dear Mr. Fantasy. 130 and 2 touchdowns. His career stats against the Jacksonville Jaguars. I feel like the Jaguars, if they know they're playing Tennessee, should barely be able to sleep. They should just be dreaming of Tractor Cito trucking them. He kills them, Shay. Another monster game by him. He continues to be RB1. Zeke Elliott getting it done again. Yep. RB3. I remember lots of debate with him before the year. He continues to just tear it up in this Dallas offense. Tons of fantasy goodness. And I'm going to take one quick victory lap on number 6 RB. Najee Harris finally had over 100-yard game. A lot of his value had been his receiving stats. They kind of covered up a lot of stuff, but he had a really good game yesterday, over 120 yards and a touchdown in Pittsburgh's win. But very happy to see him doing well after hyped in preseason.
I had a bunch of hits, one miss last week. I'll get into that momentarily, but I do want to talk about the clothes that I was rocking all day yesterday. Super comfortable. They just shipped me some Bare Bottom clothing. Bare Bottom is on a mission to make the most comfortable, made to last menswear all around, all while giving back to communities where their clothing is made. Comfy season is here. Definitely stock your closet with comfort without paying the insane markups that you see at other online and big box brands. You can feel good wearing Bare Bottoms because for each item you purchase, a nutritious school meal is donated to a child in need. Everything is built for value. You get the softest, stretchiest clothes in the game and for a great deal while doing some good in the process. Get $5 off your first order by going to barebottomclothing.com/factory. That's BEAR, like the animal, bottomclothing.com/factory. I was actually wearing their the joggers this weekend. Very, very comfortable. They're actually going to be my new go-to pants. They're like a brown, which is something I don't normally do because I'm more of a jeans guy, but those are actually my new favorite pants. I wore them on Sunday, and their tee, their stretch tee is the tech tee. Very, very comfortable. Maybe the most comfortable shirt I own. I have it in green. I wore that all around the house this weekend. So very, very great deal with Bare Bottom Clothing. Check that out. barebottomclothing.com/factory. So something that was very comfortable for me was starting Kadarius Toney yesterday after Darius Slayton and Sterling Shepard were ruled out officially. Kadarius Toney, I tweeted right after that injury news broke that they were going to be out. It was expected they were going to be out. I said that he was a must start. 13 targets, 10 catches, 189 yards, 7 rushing yards, so 196 total, 26.6 fantasy points and half-point PPR. Looked incredible. I would be worried, though, because he could be suspended. I know he was ejected for throwing a punch. It'll be interesting to see what happens. The Giants are completely depleted. We'll get into that in a moment. But some other picks that were pretty solid. I kind of urged people to pick up Dawson Knox and or Dalton Schultz yesterday. Both had nice days. Schultz with 6 catches for 79 yards on 8 targets. Dawson Knox with a huge game on Monday night. Only 3 grabs, but 117 yards and a touchdown. You see him stretching the field, which is great to see from a tight end. One I was wrong on was AJ Green. Only 2 targets, 1 catch for 13 yards. I think he could still provide a lot of value going down the rest of the year, so I wouldn't necessarily drop him if you picked him up, but not what you want to see if you just spent some fat budget on him. But Minty, let's talk about that Giants-Cowboys game and how are the Giants going to move forward? So they lost QB1, wide receiver 1, maybe wide receiver 2 for next game with Kadarius Toney potentially facing a suspension for the punch. And then they have Shepard and Slayton still dealing with injuries. And now Saquon Barkley's ankle is the size of my head. What are we doing with the Giants offense moving forward? They're playing the Rams.
I'm feeling terrible for them, and I feel bad for all the Giant fans in the office. I mean, how do you look up, you're playing your arch rival, and you lose your starting quarterback, running back, and receiver? I mean, it's just depressing. But like life, football not always fair. And the injury gods, I feel like the Giants are always one of the most hurt teams. And it's a shame, like you said, that Kadarius Toney threw that punch because he was the one sitting on the ample opportunity with all these guys out and look good. But he may be suspended next week. I'll tell you what I'm doing with all my Giants. I ain't starting them because, Mike Glennon could be in there. Booker, backup running back situation doesn't look great. I don't know. I'm just going to have to hold on to those guys and hope for the best, but I'm not running to the right waiver wire to pick up these replacements against the Rams, I don't think.
I mean, if Kadarius Toney is still available, you absolutely have to pick him up.
Toney's got to get him. 10 for 189. He you look at his little cuts, the eyes, how quick he is. He's the guy that can be really, really good, but Mike Glennon and backup running backs and that stuff I'm not as into.
Mike Glennon aside, if Kadarius Toney is playing next week, even against the Rams, he is a must start. You cannot not start him, even if Mike Glennon is at quarterback, Devontae Booker. However, Kadarius Toney lined up for one snap at Wildcat near the goal line as a quarterback, and they ran him. He played quarterback in high school, so that is kind of a different type of value. I don't know if they're going to do that often, but that is certainly an appealing thing for him having some red zone use. They also went to him a few times in the red zone, didn't necessarily convert, but it's nice to see that trust in him. Speaking of the Giants and the running back, you mentioned Devontae Booker. So yesterday he had 42 yards on 16 carries, had a touchdown, also had 3 grabs for 16 yards and a touchdown. A nice fantasy day. Are you going out and spending fab budget on Devontae Booker?
Man, I would spend, I think, a medium claim on him. It depends on how desperate you are at running back. And I know there's always a lot of desperation. If you're sitting in a spot where you need a number 2, or if you have Barkley and you got to get somebody in there, then I'm spending medium on him. But I just don't think he's like that good. Going back to his Denver time, he's not really a guy who pops. Like, I think he's a serviceable fill-in for a few weeks. And if that's your expectation for him, then I think it's fine. But I just don't see him coming in and being a savior for anybody.
So it's interesting to hear the prognosis 2 to 4 weeks, because there's a big difference right now. We got the Rams and we got the Panthers. Those are two what you would think would be tough matchups. I know the Rams just got run on by the Cardinals, but I think that's a tough matchup. Then we got at the Chiefs. I believe that's a Monday night game, and then Las Vegas, and then a bye. So if he misses 4 weeks, he's actually basically missing 6 because the bye and going in. So it is an opportunity where if you had Saquon Barkley, I think you really got to blow out the fab budget for Devontae Booker just so you guarantee yourself a Giant starting running back. But you're in a pickle that 2 to 4 weeks, because I mean, if he comes back and he's playing at Kansas City, then, it's not that bad. But if he misses, the additional week, then you figure, okay, then why would you not give him an additional week to give him another week to heal? So it's an interesting situation. I would certainly monitor a lot in the next day or so. You're making your fab claims on Tuesday night, or your waiver claims on Tuesday night. So if you have Saquon, I would recommend spending pretty heavily on Devontae Booker, because it could last, we're looking at, 5 games or 5 weeks.
Yeah, that's rough, because it just is such an obvious thing with the Giants being 1-4 right now, that if it is a 4-week thing, why would you rush him back before that bye? Your season's already looking this bad. Kind of feel bad. Saquon just been one thing after another in his career, man. I mean, it's just, we see this with running backs and the dependability, but man, it's tough.
It was tough. It was like, couple minutes into the game too, so he didn't even really get going. It was a big rivalry game, America's Game of the Week slot. Giants were coming off a win. You're expecting kind of a good competitive game. I think it would have been a much more exciting game had Saquon been there. And obviously, the injuries just racked up for the Giants in that, which was tough. Let's talk about a couple more potential waiver claims for Tuesday night. Are there any guys you specifically really like? We obviously just mentioned Devontae Booker, but any guys that you specifically like to spend some money on for next week, or is this more of a punt week?
Well, you mentioned, Toney is just, you have to spend money on him. You just mentioned him. I'm keeping an eye. It's tough because it looks like a time split, but Khalil Herbert, I thought, looked good yesterday for the Bears, the rookie out of Virginia Tech. And I'm going to tell you why. The Bears model Justin Fields has been named the starter going forward. You saw the model yesterday. They're going to try to run the ball. They're not going to throw it a ton, and they're going to play defense. Well, he had 15 carries for 64 yards. He was awesome at Virginia Tech last year. Damian Williams played. They split time, but he's got the thigh contusion. I feel like he's a guy, if you're really desperate at running back for a start, he's a guy I'd take a look at.
Okay, it's an interesting one. Kadarius Toney still only rostered right now in 17% of leagues, so 83% of leagues. I actually started. We had a tough one. Didn't start him in one league because we're just loaded at receiver, but Rowan and I. But started him in two leagues, have him in 3 out of 4. Big on the Kadarius Toney shares. If he's going to be the number one waiver claim this week, if he's in 83% of leagues available, and I would spend a lot of money in Kadarius Toney. I'm talking a 30 or fat budget at least.
And I've got another guy. The Toney thing, it just sucks the fact that he could be suspended. But no,
so
I don't hate what you're saying.
Rap Sheet just said that it's not likely he's going to be suspended, so that's big news.
Well, I mean, it's all about your best ability is availability thing. Yep. We all talk about this Giants with everybody being so banged up. It's a tremendous opportunity for Toney. Another thing to take a look at on the waiver wire is the Kansas City Chiefs running back situation. Clyde Edwards-Helaire went down last night, and it did not look good. Hate it for him. I mean, we saw the fumbles. We kind of picked on him a little bit, but had over 100 yards back-to-back weeks. Feel like he was kind of getting it together, but the injury looked significant. And so you would think Darrell Williams is the next guy in line, but last night McKinnon was playing a ton. Yeah. So maybe you're in line you may be looking at a time split there, which is unfortunate, but who cares even if it's a time split, because there's opportunity for both in that Kansas City offense. I know they didn't have their best game in the rain last night, to put it mildly, but you got to take a look at both of those guys if you're desperate at running back. Casey playing the Washington football team next week, Cheah, who you mentioned, who can't stop anybody. So you got to look at both the Kansas City running backs, I feel. Of those two, Cheah, who do you like more?
I would say Jerick McKinnon. I know that Darrell Williams wearing the number 31, which is kind of insulting as a fantasy manager, because you just always think of Priest Holmes and his fantasy greatness, and then you see Darrell Williams. It's like, okay, dude. But Jerick McKinnon wearing the number 1, looking super fast. He's had just some injury issues throughout his career, but he's a guy who Andy Reid can kind of utilize in space. Interesting player. I don't love either of them necessarily as a start. They do have an interesting matchup against Washington next week. I would kind of lean Devontae Booker over those guys, but yeah, we're talking. I don't think this is a big waiver week unless Kadarius Toney, which it looks like in 4/5 of leagues he is available in. I think he's the guy you got to get. One other guy I would kind of tab as someone to keep an eye on, especially in keeper leagues, Amon-Ra St. Brown. So he's coming off his second straight 8-target week. He put up 7 catches for 65 yards the week before, 6 catches for 70 yards. So some nice games he's stringing together in a Detroit offense that didn't score a touchdown until the 4th quarter. I think once they get going a little bit, and they are a bad team, so they should be coming from behind a lot. He's more of a slot receiver. I think he is probably like a high floor start every week, but a low ceiling guy. I think he's kind of worth a plug and play wide receiver 3 in certain spots. So I would spend some fab budget on him, especially if you're in a keeper league. I think you would spend a little bit more fab budget on him. But he's a guy that I would kind of look at. Some guys that popped the other day or yesterday, Marquez Callaway, David Njoku, Donald Parham Jr. I don't love any of these guys potentially as pickups. David Njoku will probably be a hot one because he went for 7 catches, 149 yards and a touchdown on 7 targets. One of them was kind of a missed tackle over the middle of the field. He's got great speed and then kind of got the extra 50 yards that way. But it's his first game since week 1 with more than 5 targets. He's not like a high volume guy. It does certainly help, with the injuries that they have. But I don't love David Njoku as a fantasy pickup.
The one thing I like about him, though, is that the Cleveland receiving corps, nobody's really stepped up.
Right.
And it has a lot to do with Odell Beckham. They're paying him like over $1 million a game to just not do. But I feel like Njoku, he's not going to have 7 for 149 again. Yeah. But I feel, tight end this year, behind the top couple of guys, it falls off pretty good. So, if you're really desperate, I don't hate spending somebody on him.
Yeah, if he's available, and he is in 54% of leagues. Hunter Henry, he's had 4 catches in each of his last 3 games, second game in a row with a touchdown. I don't love being, tied to that Patriots offense, but as far as, Mac Jones delivers the ball pretty quick, and Hunter Henry is a reliable option over the middle, so he's kind of a high floor guy, but also a low ceiling guy, but could plug and play as a fantasy tight end. Low fantasy tight end 1.
No, I like it. I actually like the Henry pickup more because, like you said, you look at the Patriots passing game with Mac Jones, it's all, he gets the ball out quick. It's efficient. Henry's not the highest floor guy, but he should have the targets because their receiving core is weak. Jacoby Myers and those guys. And, it's a lot of controlled shorter passing. So they look to the tight end, and it seems like Mac Jones has a better chemistry with Henry than Jonnu Smith at this point.
Yep. All right. Are there any other guys or let's talk Marquez Callaway real quick. So do you think he's worth a waiver claim? 8 targets, 4 catches, 85 yards, 2 touchdowns.
I don't think so. And I watch every play of Saints games. And I just think that, well, first of all, Michael Thomas should be coming back. Oh, they got a bye next week. And then they're in Seattle on October 25th. I feel like that's going to be Michael Thomas's return is going to be in 2 weeks.
Okay.
And I don't think he helps Callaway. And then also Traquan Smith's going to be coming back. And then you also look at Callaway had good numbers, but he caught a 50-yard Hail Mary for a touchdown. So, he had 3 for 35 and a touchdown if you take away that Hail Mary. So, y'all know I'm a Saints fan. I like to be the rose-colored glasses, but I think I'm staying away from Marquez Callaway because of that. Hooters is your go-to, means all the big games on the big screens. And I had a great time down in Florida taping a Hooters commercial, too. They were very welcoming to be down there. It's the only place with the world-famous Hooter girls who love football just as much as you do. And they're hotter looking than all of your friends. Verified fact. Hooters has game day specials to keep you hydrated and filled up with your Hooters favorites all season long. If you can't make it to Hooters for the game, you can still get your Hooters fix at home and save $10 with code Barstool when you order online. That's $10 off with code Barstool. Check out Hooters.com/Barstool for more details. On the Hooters note, it looked like Marty Mush and some of our friends are having a real big time at Hooters in Dallas over the weekend.
Yeah, I saw Marty crash the White Sox Dave's party. Had a nice little. Do you see White Sox Dave and John Cusack going at it?
Yeah.
White Sox Dave, a man not afraid to speak his mind was. And I love Barstool. I mean, you just can't make up some of these personality matchups. And I'm laying in bed last night in Vegas. It's 12:30 Pacific time, Steven Cheah. I'm trying to go to bed. I know I taped this podcast at 7 a.m. Vegas time. I'm trying to be a decent person. And I see John Cusack. It's 2:30 in the morning Central Time, and he is chirping, talking smack on Twitter. Wild, man. It's 3 a.m. in Chicago, and he's still going off about it. And I saw White Sox Dave was hinting at rough. People were hinting at rough and rowdy on it, which I thought was hilarious. But no, the whole thing was just absurd and funny. And then the actress Patricia Arquette jumped in saying White Sox Dave shouldn't tell people who they can and can't cheer for. And tell you, if there's ever anybody in the world you want to tell what they can and can't do, don't tell it to White Sox Dave.
Yeah.
Nobody I've ever met is more stubborn. He's going to do what he wants to do. So you're probably fighting a losing battle there, Patricia Arquette. I
actually completely agree with White Sox Dave, though. So this is kind of the reason I'm a Bucs fan. My dad likes the Jets and the Giants. And I just, even at 8, 9 years old, I thought that was pretty fugazi. You got to pick one team. And for John Cusack to just be, at Cubs games and shown, wearing a Cubs hat, you can't just show up at White Sox game. I know it's the same city, but they're different teams. You got to pick one. There's an inner city rivalry for a reason. You just can't. I can't imagine that happening with the Yankees and Mets. The same thing applies for the Cubs 2 teams.
You absolutely have to pick one. There's no way you can go with both.
Yeah.
No, especially living in the same city.
Yeah.
One quick sec, Shay. I've got to let you take your victory lap. Tom Brady's 44 years old. He's 44. And first time in his NFL career, he has 7 Super Bowls. He's won everything you can win. First time he's ever had over 400 yards and 5 touchdowns in a game was yesterday. And he did it against a Miami secondary that with Howard and Byron Jones that was allegedly good.
He didn't even play the last 7 minutes.
I mean, he torched them. 4-11 and 5 touchdowns. And, we talk about the Tampa. It's hard to know with the receivers. All 3 of them, Godwin had the worst game, and he had 7 catches and 70 yards. Antonio Brown, 2 touchdowns, including the 62-yarder. Mike Evans, over 102 touchdowns. I mean, this thing is an out-of-control freight train.
Yeah, I mean, skill position-wise on the outside, I was listening to the press conference after the game. Bruce Arians pretty much said, okay, if you guys want to, because Leonard Fournette's running the ball pretty well too. He said, okay, if you want to stop the run, bring 8 men in the box. We got, one-on-one on the outside. Go for it. And he's like, if you guys want to, play 2 high safeties, no problem. We'll run the ball. And a lot of teams say they can do that, but the Bucs can actually do that. So it's a very interesting one. I think when you look at it from a fantasy perspective, it can be frustrating because sometimes Mike Evans will have a big game. Sometimes he won't. Sometimes Antonio Brown will have a big game. Sometimes he won't. Sometimes Chris Godwin will have a good game. Sometimes he won't. But when Brady's eating like this, I mean, everyone's having a good game. So that's great. They are a little bit tougher to manage, and you're kind of playing Russian roulette as far as who's going to have a good game when. But right now, they're obviously rolling a little bit. So it's nice to see they're playing the Eagles on Thursday night. The Eagles are a little bit scared. They have a very good defense. Javon Hargrave's playing out of his mind up the middle. The Bucs have a very good offensive line, so I am confident that they're going to be able to put it on Philly. I think it could be a high-scoring game. We don't have the best defense. We saw Jacoby Brissett looked really good in the first half. I think he had like 5 incompletions. Myles Gaskin looked really good. One thing about the Bucs is you can't run on them at all. They allowed -1 yard rushing on the Pats last week. The Dolphins, what they did was they threw Myles Gaskin the ball. His over-under for carries was 6.5. He had 5 carries, but he had 10 catches. 2 of them were for touchdowns. So I would be a little bit, 2 guys I would watch for on Thursday, or actually 3 guys on the Eagles that I think could have pretty good games. I wouldn't necessarily depend on which one because it's very tough to predict who's going to have a good game in the Philadelphia backfield. But either Miles Sanders or Kenny Gainwell, one of those two, I think Gainwell, just because he's a better receiver, could have a pretty good game. And then on the outside, I think Devontae Smith is going to have a pretty good game. The Bucs are just really beat up in the secondary. And he's a very good young rookie. So I think that those guys are going to be nice fantasy plays or at least Devontae Smith will be a nice fantasy play for Thursday night.
You look at the Eagles be similar to that. All hell broke loose. The Chiefs won like 40-29 or whatever.
Yep.
And you look at this matchup, and I think this could be very similar because, as you said, like Tampa, for all their strengths, they're just really banged up at DB.
Yeah.
The DB at defensive back right now, and so I think this game could have a lot of fantasy goodness. And so I agree with you. I think this could be a higher over under Thursday night. Lots of value.
52.5 right now. Yeah.
I like Gainwell. The because like you said, I just don't. Tampa's run defense in their front 7 is still just a monster. So I think there's going to be value there in that game. I like what you're saying.
One player I like who is I think he's like RB11 right now, DeAndre Swift next week against Cincinnati. We mentioned this game before. Cincinnati just gave up 14 carries for 104 yards, 7.42 yards per carry to Aaron Jones. I know Jamal Williams technically gets more carries, but DeAndre Swift also can hurt you through the air. Scored a touchdown yesterday. I like DeAndre Swift definitely as a fantasy start next week against Cincinnati.
Shay, speaking of the lines, did you see Dan Campbell in that post game yesterday? My heart goes out to him. I mean, just to lose on a 66-yard field goal and a 54-yard field goal at the gun. I mean, you're talking about an 0-5 team. They are playing their hearts out. He's a former Saints player and assistant under Sean Payton. I felt for him, and I want to see Detroit get a win here soon.
That was heartbreaking. I mean, they looked lifeless for most of the game. Come back in the fourth quarter, take the lead, and then give it up on that last-second field goal. It's crazy how many last-second field goals Minnesota has to determine games, but yeah, that tough. Dan Campbell's really the people's coach, and you do want to see him pull one out. Interesting matchup against Cincinnati. Cincinnati can be hot and cold, but they are a much improved team. Shout out to me for saying that they're better than Pittsburgh going into the year, which I still think they are. And yeah, I think that'll be an interesting matchup just from a fan's perspective that you would think, going into the year, Cincinnati or Detroit Cincinnati is going to be a good game. That's probably going to be the worst game of the year. Actually, it's going to be a pretty entertaining game, we would think, based on, the fantasy numbers and also the storylines going into it.
Yeah, and then 2 other games I'm looking at ahead that I think could have a lot of fantasy value next week. The Oklahoma Bowl, Kyler Murray against Baker Mayfield next week.
Yep.
That's exciting. And I know Arizona had their 117-10, but one of their worst offensive performance of the year. You got to think they'll bounce back. But that game should be a lot of fun with tons of fantasy goodness. Got to start keeping an eye on the weather in Cleveland. Remember last year how the Browns had like three home games where it was like 40-mile-an-hour winds and pouring. This is about the time of year in mid-October. You got to start glancing at that weather report a little more every week. And then the other game that is going to be a wild fantasy game, Monday night, the Bills play in Tennessee on Monday night. And remember last year, Tennessee blew Buffalo out on a Tuesday game because remember we had all the COVID moving games?
Yep.
Tennessee blew them out.
That was the Josh Norman stiff arm game.
Yeah, you got to think Buffalo's going to be ready for this, but Tennessee, I mean, keep an eye on Zach Moss is a guy I really like next week. Tennessee's run defense is atrocious right now. James Robinson had a huge game yesterday. I think Zach Moss could be a good start next week. And Buffalo looking for revenge. Tennessee blew them out in that Tuesday night game last October because the COVID game's moving around. I think there could be a lot of fantasy goodness in this matchup.
Yeah, I like that matchup as well. An interesting matchup we could see or could not see is Minnesota, Carolina. Could be the top two fantasy running backs playing each other, or they could be inactive for the game. We saw Dalvin Cook and Christian McCaffrey both inactive for last week. I would expect them both back next week, which would put, for the most part, unanimous 1 and 2 selections going against each other, which is always fun to see. A player I specifically like for next week who hasn't, been absolute gangbusters this year is Tyler Higbee. We talked about it. The Giants have given up 4 touchdowns to tight ends this season. Dalton Schultz had a nice game with 6 catches, 79 yards. I think Higbee, who did score a touchdown last week but didn't really do much outside of that, could be due for a bounce back game against the Giants.
I like that too. And I know a lot of people have been saying that Higbee has been a little frustrated. He might be a decent buy low candidate. What's happened to him? Van Jefferson stepping up as that third receiver has gotten some of his target share. Yeah,
and Deshaun Jackson. I saw one bet that I made yesterday, which was such an easy one, was Robert Tonyan. His over-under for yesterday's game was 33.5. I don't think he's had over 33.5 yards the entire season. He has completely disappeared. He was a guy with, I think he had 12 touchdowns last year. Completely. He is droppable. You can drop Robert Tonyan safely in all leagues, I think.
Yeah, he had 11 touchdowns last year, I believe.
11.
But he's totally touchdown dependent. And that's kind of the gamble when you take a guy that literally his whole value was touchdowns.
Yeah. And the Packers offense, we've talked about it and mentioned on the show, they're not like a high volume, high quantity. Like you think Aaron Rodgers, he's going to be throwing for so many yards. He's not like a 350 plus yard guy. Like he's probably going to throw in the 200s, low to mid, be very efficient and like carve you up that way. Devontae Adams is going to get almost all the yards. But yeah, looking at Tonyan's season, it's just not good at all. He's had one game in double digit receiving this year, and it was 52 yards and a touchdown in week 2. Other than that, he's at 8, 6, 8, and 8 fantasy total yards in each game. Drop Robert Tonyan.
Yeah, that's not good. It's just a weird year for tight ends, like you said. Unless you have Travis Kelce, it's almost like you're playing week to week. Looking to who's getting streaming.
We mentioned it last week. Stream guys that are connected to a good offense. Tyler Higbee is connected to a good offense. Keep it rolling for this week. All right, this was a fun show, Ben. You're gonna be back next week from Vegas after. Would you say it was a successful week out there playing some poker?
Yeah, I would say, it started out awesome. I cashed in the first 2 of the first events I played. It was kind of unfortunate over the weekend. So I played the $1,500 Millionaire Maker, and I played it twice. And took Friday, it was unfortunate. I lost Queen's Ace 9 for a lot. And then Saturday, Shay, I swore vengeance on him, and I came back and was crushing them. I had a good stack at dinner break, and right after dinner break, I lost a Titanic pot and for people in poker, I had Ace King against Pocket Jack. So it's just a coin flip. But if I would have won this flip, I would have had like 110,000 chips. At 1,200, I would have had a huge stack and was looking to make a run. And for not playing live poker much in 2 years, I'm very, very encouraged by what happened out here going to the main event. Also, shout out, got to watch Sunday Night Football with Daniel Negreanu last night.
Oh, nice.
Poker legend. Yeah, did that interviews up on Crackin' Aces. Today, the last day in Vegas, I'm about to go get a crap ton of interviews and content for Crackin' Aces. I want to prove to Barstool that I'm not wasting my time out here. So I would say overall, the trip has been a success and has me super excited about the World Series main event, which is November 5th when I'll be coming back here.
Nice, dude. We're looking forward to that. And again, for anyone who listened last week, my DMs are open for fantasy advice. Just show a screenshot of a 5-star review for the Fantasy Football Factory. Follow Fantasy Football Factory, FFF Pod on Instagram. Screenshots of both. Ask me a question. I'll be there for you. But we appreciate you guys for listening every week. Dear Mr. Fantasy, we'll catch you on Sunday at 11:30 Eastern. We had a good stream yesterday with a bunch of good recommendations. Kadarius, Toney, Dawson Knox, Dalton Schultz, hopefully getting people in the winner circle. We're going to be there for you every Sunday at 11:30, presented by Miller Lite for Dear Mr. Fantasy on the Barstool Sportsbook. We'll see you then. We'll have some stories and some stuff coming out through the week, but that's going to be the next time we see you. So we're looking forward to taking your questions, and thank you guys for listening.